Hello. When Langston was coming up to its 40th anniversary, its chief executive, Helen Gall, thought it a good idea to get some of the memories of those who were involved in the very early days in setting it up, and also who came to work for Langston back in those days and stayed with Langston for quite a long time. Excellent idea, and she asked me to help. Now, I'm Bob Tate, that's my name, and I was one of the people who helped set Langston up at the very beginning, and over the following 38 years I served the governing body in a number of capacities, including being chairman and various other things, and only stepped down a couple of years ago. We do want to emphasise how important Langston has been in certain respects, not least as an innovator, but most importantly of all in its mission, which has been to pay particular attention to creating affordable housing for single persons. And you'll hear quite a lot from us about why we chose that route and chose that path, even when it's sometimes later it got us into some difficulties, as you will hear. So pretty much without further ado, let me introduce people. This is Sandy Murray, and if there's anyone who can be blamed for the whole thing, this is the man, because undoubtedly he gathered together the group of people at the very beginning who got it started. One of the people he recruited very, very early on, in fact at the very start, is Alan Grant. Now, Alan, like Sandy, served the association in a number of capacities, and Alan stayed with the association on the governing body for a very long time, but 20 years later he became just the second chief executive of Langston. Is Ken Clark. He was one of the first two appointees as officers of the association, and in his case as development officer. We'll come to that bit shortly. And he joined the association pretty early on, only about a year after the association was founded, so he came and joined the association in 1978, and he stayed for a very long time, as you'll see in the course of the conversation. Today I have with me Lynn Cargill, who joined the association in order to look after and manage our customer service, which is very, very central, as we've, I think, all been trying to emphasise, to the entire ethos of the association. And so she will take us through what her experiences of the association were, and we'll get talking generally. We'll just see where the conversation leads, as in all these interviews. Sandy, take us back to the very beginning. Why was it that you thought it was a good idea to set up Langston, what became known as Langston?
Well, very quickly, the story started when I was at university, and there was a society there were lots of societies, and one of them was the Alfredson Society, which became a Catholic society. But anyway, we got a presentation from a priest, Anthony Ross, who was a Dominican monk, who had been involved in trying to work with homeless people in Edinburgh, and it was quite inspirational. I then went and spent a summer in Edinburgh doing that, and came back all enthused and wanted to do something. So we decided when we go back, I spoke to the society, that we would set up a soup run. And after a while we eventually got the use of a building in East North Street, just opposite the lodging house, which was run by a mission. And we opened it in a Christmas. All we had were some mattresses we'd managed to get from people, and it was just, the idea was just, it was just a place for people to come in over Christmas for a bit of shelter. So by then we'd worked with the council, and it was agreed that they would build a new night shelter, and it was going to be built in the back of the lodging house. We ended up in what everybody eventually called the notorious Chippy, which was a building along the street, again in East North Street, which had been a chip shop, which we had just had to gut out in use. We then got our brand new night shelter and moved into that. But one of the problems about the night shelter is it is what it is. People have got to get out during the day, there's no stability, there's nothing like that. And we were right behind a lodging house which was capable of taking 250 men, and never had more than about 120 of them. So eventually I did get appointed to the lodging house, and we moved from having 120. We eventually had a women's wing as well, because it didn't take. and we were full. We were practically full.
I think when I started with Langston, the emphasis was on single people with certain other issues.
Indeed,
probably because of the history from
Indeed,
the lodging house.
Exactly.
And that was one of the difficulties we had, because the rest of community tended to stereotype these people.
Uh-huh.
If you were single, you were perhaps unemployed, you were perhaps difficult, you may have mental health issues, all sorts of things. And we had very much to deal with that, to show the wider population within whose communities we were now developing, that in fact this was a stereotype that wasn't fair and wasn't accurate. And as the years went by, not only did we find a change in attitude from the surrounding communities, but interestingly, the idea that more and more people thought, well, you know, I can be single now. A lot of people had pressures not to form single households, but more and more people are choosing to be single. So the breadth of experience of single people that we were dealing with filled the whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum of it,
Absolutely,
yes. That is what's happened.
I used to do all the inductions,
Aye.
and I always used to start off saying, after the war, and people would go, what the hell are we going back to World War II for? So, you know, after the war, the government decided to house everybody. They started with the families, and they said, well, once we house all the families, we'll then go and house everybody else. And of course, they never housed all the families. So all the other people, the single people, never get anywhere to stay. And our ethos was, from a narrow perspective, if we want to empty the lodging houses, you can't take 280 people, alcohol problems, etc., and dump them into a block of flats. You have to spread them around, you know, one here, one there. By the homemakers started, in fact. And also, just in generality, there are lots of single people who know where to stay. So why was no housing being provided for them? So those two things, from the general and the specific, meshed, and gave us a tremendous ethos to push forward and say, there are properties, we can do it, we can get the money.
And it starts out, as you say, with you seeing acute needs among single homeless people. Then you realise that even for those in acute need, there isn't a single answer. But you put your finger on something which we've always held to be most important at Langston, and that is that housing is a pathway to self-respect for those who are capable of it, and with support. In fact, we were, I think, proved right. A lot of people were capable of it. Alan, you can comment.
Absolutely. No, I think that the story of relationship with the night shelters and the origins of the Sandy's involved in the lodging house always struck me as being central to what Langston is all about. I remember when I was chief executive here, one of my pleasant duties was to conduct induction of new staff, and I bet they got fed up hearing the story of the lodging house, which I always gave them as being the sort of the central story of Langston, which is about the change from the indignity and insecurity of hostel accommodation when you had to leave in the morning and weren't even sure you're going back in at night, to the dignity and comfort and affordability of individual living.
In the early days, the Housing Corporation officials, they were as willing to innovate if they were given a good argument as anybody else. Later on, policy became more rigid.
Home ownership became the ideal, and rented stuff in the widest sense became much less important. You're only really allowed to do it if you committed yourself to a large amount of what they wanted you to do. The more single person housing you provided, the more you realised you needed. More and more. We had 1,000 people on the waiting list, you know, and you just were not able to provide the accommodation. And that was very, very annoying, I thought. At the same time, it meant we could spend more time, and did spend more time, on more specialist accommodation. I mean, the hospital closure programme was another major success, I think. And the setting up of Grampian Cane Community Charitable Trust, and the hostels we provided.
So we were, progressively as time went on, we were in a fall back in terms of the general needs we were trying to serve for single person. But we can claim that we did manage to make some real advances in these more specialist areas, where paradoxically there was more funding available one way than another.
A lot of it was trying to find where the cash was going to come from. And we started looking at alternative locations of cash, but adjuncts, additional cash from councils, additional cash from health boards. Hospital closure programme, for example, I have been to meetings where there were 13 people in the meeting and they all were putting money in. Different bits of of housing, different bits of health, different bits of social work, all had a contribution. And they wanted the contribution to be as small as possible.
Yeah.
You had to get them all together to get the money to build the hostel or to renovate the hostel.
Exactly. So it started from what people might think is a quite narrow objective, which was to do something about the most acutely needy, who were living in demeaning conditions. The northeast conditions of life in the northeast lodger, were pretty Victorian, weren't they?
They were very Victorian. Actually, interestingly, what you got was you got a wooden cubicle, which went to about 5 feet high. There was no cover on the top of it. Everything was open at the top, and you had about 4 feet wide and 6 feet. And in that you had a bunk, and you had a mattress. You had no security, nothing at all. I remember, because one of the things that Langston did was it joined in the campaigning on the whole homelessness, single homelessness front. We dismantled, because we were doing renewing, an actual cubicle and took it to a national conference and put it up as part of the exhibition. And it was really fascinating. It was a real eye-opener for piles of people, and you could watch people say, I can't go in there, and all the rest of it, And we won that particular thing, but I mean, the real winning was actually getting the message across to people.
Well,
this is what these places are about,
And it took a long time for us to acquire that symbolic building, by which time we were well underway. If I remember, it took about 10 years to do.
Well, my recollection is that it continued to operate to receive people mid-80s. We didn't actually complete the acquisition and the redevelopment of the site until about 1992, 3 or thereabouts. Early 90s certainly. And it's astonishing to think that was, to my mind, just a short time ago.
Yes.
That pre-Victorian system was still operating until very, very recently.
Well, we had our own direct hostels in those days, in the early days.
Yes.
We had Fraser House and D House, both direct entry hostels, and we managed those particularly well.
Direct entry meaning?
Meaning people could just turn up at the door and say, I'm homeless, do you have a room? We also had a list of people who wanted to move on from other forms of accommodation into the hostel. We managed that 24 hours a day, and we gave it was mainly personal support, helping people with issues about personal hygiene, perhaps trying to find a job. And again, what was so successful about these hostels and the way in which we supported them was we could then move people into mainstream housing.
What about major developments? What would you think as being our
I think one of the
high points?
One of the high points was the acquisition of the site at Hutchins Street.
Yes,
And the final stages of that were the Housing Corporation, we won't name the individual involved, but I mean, were adamant that this was far too big a project for us, and we were equally clear that no, it wasn't. It was what we wanted to be doing. And of course the other associations at the time thought it was far too big for us to be getting it, because they ought to get their share of it. But anyway, we decided that no, we were going to hang out, aware of the fact that we were getting close to the end of the financial year, and aware of the fact that the Housing Corporation had to spend that money by the end of the financial year. Who was going to blink first? So we didn't blink, and we got the whole site. And that really took us to a different level in terms of the development programme and our ability to do it.
It was, and I think there are several aspects to the Hudson Street development that were significant for Langston and for the Housing Association movement in Aberdeen. Scale is one thing, but equally important too is to remember what that site was and what we made it into. And that was the old slaughterhouse, which had ceased to be occupied. There was a major environmental sore in a not particularly attractive part of Aberdeen, and we redeveloped it with a development about which you can have views as to how effective it was, but certainly totally transformed the site
Yes, it did.
and the environment
And the surroundings.
and I think it now sustains it's made that part of George Street and that part of Aberdeen much more vibrant than it
Yes,
was before.
exactly so.
And I think that's one of the many things that the housing association movement have done in general in Aberdeen, and Langston have done in particular, to regenerate community.
Indeed, because we brought back into that run-down part of Aberdeen a not inconsiderable population. I think, if I remember right, it was about 145 units. And given that there were single persons, and nonetheless 145 people going to the shops, you know, which otherwise were not going to the shops. You've referred quite a bit to Langston being involved with a variety of other organisations
Yes,
right from the start. So that was in the DLA.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
we were
Without
keen
a-
on partnerships.
Well,
Right.
without a doubt. I mean,
Right.
the very start, as you well know, being one of the principal drivers behind Langston, the relationship with the lodging house
Yeah,
was the start, and with the Cyrenians.
indeed.
And then, of course, we worked very, very closely with a tiny little organisation in those days called Cornerstone.
Yes.
And
Right.
look where they've got
Well,
to.
right, to become the benchmark organisation for in their area.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but we
I think
we
could
were
be
there
very
first.
proud of the association.
We
with
were
them,
we
yeah.
were their first
Indeed we were, yeah.
partner agency,
Yeah.
and yes,
And that went on, and we got involved in all sorts of schemes, like the closure of Ladybank and all the rest of it, complex scheme involving links with the health service and
Absolutely.
so on. So we were never shy, were we,
No, not at all.
in taking on new relationships and partnership. But we were always a bit cautious about not wanting to get too big, particularly not too big too quickly.
it was a debate we had often on committee and
Yeah.
in the senior management team. Do we want to focus on our primary aim, which was to ensure that single people had access to decent, affordable housing,
Affordable being the key word.
and the support that they might
Yes,
need. They
yeah,
might need.
Exactly.
Or do we want to develop just for development's sake? Now, my heart really went out to Ken and his team often, because there was clearly a political dynamic to development.
Yes.
And very often we would get development opportunities in places, and I say to Ken, there's no demand for it there.
Yeah.
But we were torn.
Yeah.
Do we develop or don't we? And what we found very frustrating often was that the political dynamic to develop in a particular area wasn't supported by the information that the local authority officers might have to give us the confidence that we would have long-term lettings.
That's right.
And everyone, government, consultants, were all saying to us, you don't need to do that. No, this will be acceptable. And we're saying, no, we're not planning for what people want now. We're planning for what people will be accept in 60, 50, 100 years' time. So we want door sizes, the right size. We want an extra room. If possible, we want 2 bedrooms. We want doors which are wide enough for a wheelchair to go in. We want completely level access. Now that was anathema to most builders. You had to build up so the water coming in. No, you can't take a wheelchair up 3 steps. You have to have level access. We were constantly saying, no, we're just not willing to accept that. We were fortunate in Aberdeen that many of the flats are small. It's not like Glasgow where you have big 5-room, 10-minute flats. So the flats in Aberdeen were perfect for single people. But of course, they're all upstairs. And that meant we had to look for a new build development as well as rehab. And that was quite difficult in Aberdeen because it was very difficult to find land. Time the oil, everybody was buying land. Land was very expensive.
The story of what's happened to single persons and their housing needs in the UK and in Scotland and in the North East, that's at the heart of it. So what we were facing locally, and it reflected what was being faced nationally, was that more and more single people were falling further and further back behind the queues. So would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think the need for single person housing is as acute as ever it was, and of course, as you rightly say, the nature of that need has diversified a lot across a much broader economic band than was the case, certainly with our perception within our mission 40 years ago. It's probably worthwhile saying, while acknowledging that, to recognise that there are a number of areas of need have been met by us and continue to be met by us. We've talked about the housing needs of people with particular learning difficulties or disabilities. Now that, I'm not suggesting for a second that that's no longer an issue, but it's well established as part of our mainstream housing provision. And that provision is met in the context of the dignity of individual living. But counter to that, you can't talk about single person housing without talking about housing benefits, welfare reform. I think that, if anything, underlines the fact that single person housing is still a major issue. That does.